Okay, everyone, good evening. Welcome to the Housing and Community Safety Scrutiny Subcommittee. I'm Councillor Tom Flynn, I chair this committee. And we'll go round the table, for those of you who don't know everyone, and then I'll ask some people who are our guests this evening to give us evidence. I'll ask them to introduce themselves as well. So if I can start at this end of the table, Chris.
So I'm Chris Cloud from Tenants Council.
I'm Carl Eastham, I'm a councillor in Chorlton Ward.
I'm Councillor Martin Seaton from East Warwick Ward.
Councillor Eleanor Kerslake from Newington Ward.
Councillor Ben Johnson, Grange Ward and Vice Chair of the committee.
Vijay Luthra, Councillor for Chorlton Ward.
Damien O'Brien, Grange Ward.
Frank Laura, Winners Council.
It's Roy Williams from the Scrutiny team.
And anyone that would like to introduce themselves at the back.
We're from the group from Leather Market J&B, so I'm John Paul Mason, I'm chair of Leather Market J&B. Ron Elston, who's repair manager from Leather Market J&B. Bernie McEwen, who's finance manager from Leather Market J&B. Peter Coulthard, who's a resident director of Leather Market J&B. And one of our residents has come to watch as take part. There's Ruben Chowdhury, who also from Leather Market J&B.
Thanks everyone. Anyone on this side? Do you want to say something? So no urgent business has been sent to me. Any disclosure of interest in dispensations? No? Okay, minutes from the previous meeting in June. I'll take this page by page. Page 1.
Agreed.
Page 2.
Agreed.
Page 3.
Agreed.
Done. I've got one slight change. Page 2. I expect to fit to that as earlier, but I think recommendation number 3. All consultations should include question. I think we need to elaborate on that slightly just to clarify exactly what we meant. My understanding, if everyone can recall from last time, is exactly what we meant by that was that sometimes consultations seem to present something that the council wants us to look at, and we were asking that all consultations from now and ask a specific question to residents. That was the recommendation, but I think just a bit more detail on that one might pad it out a bit. So we will get that sorted after the meeting, if that's okay with everyone. Okay. So our first quick item of business before we get on to the main businesses this evening is just to think about the interviews that we're doing at the November meeting. We've got Michael Shittu, who is Cabinet Member for Communities and Safety, and Xander Gibson, the Borough Commander, will be here next month. So we will we'll have them for a couple of hours between them. So we just want to, it's basically to give Xander especially a heads up. And Michael, a heads up on the sort of issues we might want to be looking at. I'll start with Ben.
I think the potential loss of the PCSAs is a really big issue, and what the timeline is for that, and what plans they have in place to keep community policing without PCSAs, if that's the way we go.
Yep.
We've had for some time co-location of the Southwark community wardens with Safer, the S&Ts, the community policing teams. I'd like his view on how well that's been working.
Okay. Yeah.
Can I just add to that? Because my understanding is we're going to have enforcement officers who do everything from food safety to crime, if I understood correctly. So that would be as linked to that point. But what the future is for these enforcement officers?
Yeah.
That would be for Mike.
Carl, did you have something you mentioned to me before?
Yeah, sorry. There's a lot of ASB issues around the Elephant and Castle. I think a bit of a focus on that, even if it's only 10, 15 minutes, or focus on that would be great.
Yeah. Eleanor?
I think there's a very high profile incident in my ward but involving young people from Martin's ward, and particularly focusing on young people and knife crime, I think would be important.
Yep. Martin?
My question is really around the police and its relations with various communities in Southwark. Have those relations improved or not? And what are they doing to ensure it does improve?
Yep. Any more?
Okay. Go ahead.
I think just following up from Ben's point on PCSOs, I know Theresa May's been talking a lot about how representative the police are. Now I've heard that PCSOs are the most representative part of the police, so it would be great if they could come armed with some stats for us on that.
Yeah.
Following on the Theresa May theme, also around stop and search, if they'd be interested to see what the Southwark data is for that, and targeting of minority BNE groups.
Southwark data, yep. I'm going to add one for Michael, which is, I believe Jonathan Toy is leaving this week. So we are short one of the key members of staff at Southwark, and someone who has, I think, been really on the ball with this. And so I'd be very keen to know what the plans are for recruitment, around replacements. A lot of the roles have changed, and get a feel for whether or not we're confident that whatever the new role is, that it fits what Southwark needs, and that they've got, that they're on their way to filling that gap, because I think Jonathan will be a real loss.
And also how they're taking things forward, like the Women's Charter and those sorts of initiatives.
Yeah.
That's going to be picked up on some by some.
Okay, I think that's enough for us to send them. That doesn't mean we have to limit ourselves to those on the night, but it just gives them a steer as to some of the data that they might bring.
Could I have one more? I'd be interested to have a view from Xander Gibson of the financial impact on Southwark of the cuts to the Met Police budget.
Okay. That's great. Okay, so we're happy for me to go away, and Fitz will send those off to Michael and to Xander, and we will see them this time next month. Okay, so the main, I think, item of business this evening is to hear from, we were hoping to hear from some TMOs regarding their repairs systems and processes. We're very keen in particular to see what we could learn from our TMOs, where they were innovating, where they were doing stuff better than Southwark, where there were opportunities for Southwark to copy some of that, and to compare, and see what the state of play is with some of our TMOs. However, I mean, we did invite 3 TMOs tonight. One didn't reply. One we were expecting, but I don't think they're here. So we will see if they show. But we do have a contingent here from JMB, and they've written a very, very interesting report that Fitz circulated the other day. Some very helpful and insightful information in here, and some numbers as well, which we're very interested in. And so if I could invite JMB to come up to the table here. Anyone that wants to come, please do feel free to come up as well. And I don't know, John Paul, if you would like to just introduce what we're talking about today, and then we'll get started with some questions.
As I say, we've sent the note up to you, which I hope you'll find useful. So I'll explain again how we deal with repairs. It's very much a team approach, which is why we've come on-handed with the finance person, the repairs manager, and some residents who keep an eye on what's going on. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to come and speak to Housing Scrutiny, and it's lovely to see 4 of our 6 ward councillors sat round the table. So hopefully we can provide some knowledge further to what they know of us already. I should also add that I was chair of the Borough Brankside Area Forum until 2013. So though I've not personally lived it, I've been aware of the issues on the other side of the fence in terms of the Southwark service. So I'll try and reflect on that, but forgive me if I'm not entirely up to date on everything. As a kind of ground set, you talked about numbers. When we last did a comparison, which was a couple of years ago, to our costs compared to the Southwark's schedule of rates, the contractor that we use as a backup contractor was 25% cheaper than the schedule of rates. Our own in-house team worked out as being 40% cheaper than schedule of rates,
And I think when we use SBS, we end up paying an inflation. So we paid more than the scheduled rates for jobs that came through SBS, which I think was in double figures.
After year end, we got an extra sum, depending how many jobs SBS had done that year. So we had no budgetary certainty on how much things would cost before the year was already over.
But that was more than the schedule of rates, rather
way
than
more than schedule rates.
And for us, and say why we've come mob-handed, is for the cost of repairs isn't just the money, but it's actually the time and the effort if it's not done right. And not just the time and the effort for the staff team, but the impact on people's lives. So at the risk of sounding like a management consultant, we like to think of a kind of triangle of quality. So it's about outcomes, which is, does the repair fix the problem? Obviously the finance, which matters, but also the resident experience. You know, how was it for you? And we think by getting a good grip on the system, we're able to bring down financial costs by tightening up on all those three aspects. So for us, I think efficient and effective management of our contractors is really important. And, you know, there is too much kind of good enough for council out there. So contractors go and deliver a service and nobody's really keeping a kind of tight eye on. This is not for us. And so they just kind of, oh, well, you know, it's fixed, isn't it? And we actually spend a lot of time with our contractors. And I don't want to make it sound like a big stick, because actually it's about, I think, building effective relationships. I mean, Ron spends a lot of time sat down with our lead contractors, and I don't believe anybody wants to come to work doing a bad job. And I think we've built up a productive relationships where, you know, the contractors understand us, we understand the contractors, and that helps deliver things. And certainly in the very specialist areas, like heating and lifts, we've appointed our own specialist consultants to help us get the most out of the contractors. So, you know, our lift availability is now something like 99.7 or something very, very high indeed. And that's always been one of those things quite hard to manage, because, you know, the lifts people say, oh, you know, we're specialists in these, you know, we're doing this job because we need to do it, and it's a lot harder to challenge the contractors. But if we've got you know, the specialist consultants backing us up, that's really helpful. And certainly in terms of heating, I mean, we had a major district heating failure on one of our estates, which was very unfortunate, and the specialist contractors were very helpful in helping to manage that. I'd say I know the board members concerned, but, you know, saw that in action. And we also get continuity through these relationships. So rather than, if a job does take several visits, you don't just get some random person like a taxi cab off the front of the list who you then have to explain right from the very beginning what happens. You know, you've either got these contractors we've got good relationships with, where the contractors monitor and track these, or, you know, we've got Ron and his team in the office who are able to advise on that. And I think the way we do things, and we're lucky to have a housing office, and we're lucky to have a clear and accessible management team, gives very clear accountability and line of sight between the individuals, you know, having repairs done, and the contractors. You know, so if something doesn't go right, they know where to go. And the very worst thing when repairs go wrong, certainly I've spoken to Southwark tenants, is that sense of powerlessness. That's, you know, we don't know what to do. And, you know, I've been sat at meetings where kind of the ward councillors have said, yeah, we spend half an hour on the phone to the call centre just like you do. And indeed, the area manager, who's the person who sits at the area forums and is supposedly accountable, will say, well, you know, I can manage everything apart from repairs, and, you know, they're just out there, and there isn't a grip on it. And that clear line of sight, which is understood not just by the team in the office, you know, so Rob knows if he walks through the estate and something's not been fixed, he'll be collared by someone who'll say,
the problem. An half-hour walk through our estates probably takes about 2.5 hours.
But our contractors understand that as well, so they know that, you know, if something doesn't quite work on a J&B estate, that somebody will be on their case about it. And we're lucky we've got committed people like Peter who do spend a lot of their, I wouldn't call it spare time, but, you know, a lot of time committed to saying, well, you know, have we got stuff right? So it's that that line of sight and scrutiny makes sure that everybody understands the role they've got to play, what they've got to deliver, and we're more likely to get stuff right first time round. And I use this as a parallel story, again, speaking to somebody off a Borough and Bankside estate. You get things where a guy from a lighting contractor who comes from a long way away, in their van, was replacing a light, and one of the residents said, "Well, why aren't you replacing that light next to it that's also out?" And he's got a box of spare light bulbs. Which is not my job sheet, mate. So they wait for another job to come up at a cost of goodness knows how much, because I don't know how much the van journey in and out of the M25 does. But that's the sort of stupidity that you sometimes see in the Southwark system, because there isn't this tight grip on the contractors. And I think, when we get big things go wrong, like our district heating system, or even just some of the more planned work we do, I think, we've got the people, these people here you'll see sat around me will also come out and sit down and talk to residents and explain what's going on. So we had some quite difficult meetings when people had been without heating and hot water for 6 weeks. But actually, the ability to sit around the table and explain to people what was happening and explain what we were doing, even if it wasn't that successful at the time, I think helped take people through those journeys. And I mean, the ward councillors here were from Chaucer were better able to answer how much, concern they're still receiving about that in future. But I think, being able to sit down and have that accountability and to take the residents through the journey has been very important. And a final thing, and this is sort of Bernie's world rather than Ron's, is when we get invoices through, we have line-by-line scrutiny between Bernie and another one of the resident directors about all the invoices, each and every invoice that comes in from a contractor. So they'll know if something's not quite right on line 34, then that will be picked up, and we'll go back to the contractor and tell them about it and challenge them about it. And I think that, it builds a kind of culture of let's get it right. They know if they're a bit slappy, you can't do one of our invoices on a Friday afternoon because we'll be on the phone to say what's happening here. So I think that helps focus everybody's minds. But I think it's down to effective partnerships and really good, with those effective partnerships you can build really good management of contractors, and it's that line of sight and accountability. And I think those are what deliver. I know you've got some numbers for jobs compared to the schedule rates at the very back of your pack. So that's kind of my introduction over and above what's in the briefing notes. I hope that was helpful. And we're here to give as much as we can to help the work of the committee.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, John Paul. That's a really good starting point to get us all thinking this evening. I mean, the areas I'm interested in, I spend more time than anyone should have to going out, pretending to be a plumber and stuff like that with SBS and MERS. And so I've seen a lot about the process of how they work in terms of, how they allocate jobs to operatives, how those operatives indicate that they're on the way, or that they're there, or that the job's complete, and so on. Is that, I mean, the way they do that, very mechanised process of PDAs and logging in and so on, is that something that is because of the sheer size of their contracts, or do you have similar things in place in terms of, so they might get automated texts to residents to say the operative's on the way, that sort of thing?
No, the information will be fed back manually at the end of the working day.
Yeah.
So we don't use that access at all.
Okay.
And you're right. I mean, that can take up quite a lot of process time. And in my day job, I work for the NHS, and I know they've done studies in the NHS that show a text is really important on, to get people to attend their appointments and make sure they're there. But I think, all that is it's not quite a false science. We've looked at whether we should have those sorts of things, but I think the scrutiny at the back end, the fact that if something does go wrong, people will walk through the door of the office, people will say, can I speak to Ron about what's happening? I think that back end scrutiny and effectiveness helps, avoid the need for that.
It's an interesting point that because a lot of this report talks about the benefits of small. You know, it's something that I'd often approach this from the idea that, you know, economies of scale meant that, for example, Southwark would be able to get a cheaper deal through SBS or Mears doing literally, you know, tens of thousands of repairs every year. But a lot of what we're seeing here suggests that, you know, that can lose some of the face-to-face that you're talking about, those relationships that you have on the estates, which allow for the, you know, accountability. So I'm really interested in, you know, that kind of small, local, but also in here, I mean, one of the things this committee's touched on before is the retention of staff. So SBS have fairly good retention of staff compared to Mears. Your retention of staff is remarkable from the figures I've seen in here. You know, people have been there for decades. You know, and you know, is there a secret to that? Do you have a working environment that's conducive to people staying? Is it people live on the estate and they feel loyal to it?
When I started at GMB, I just had, prior to that was on Lambeth Council, the Greater London Council, Williams, the maintenance on schools. I was actually a council tenant on the Gloucester Grove at that time. So I was pretty well familiar with tenants' needs and where things don't go right. I can always remember, obviously, heating situations. We were just speaking about this just earlier, where we've got a small staff, so you'd expect to see the same operatives. If you see the heating side of it, what used to infuriate, and still does infuriate tenants, is the fact that another guy will come along and he'll start from scratch. Then he'll say that's parts required. Then he'll turn up and he'll go, what's he talking about? It happens, it's for real. And that is, I find, very infuriating for tenants, actually, because you're not getting it right, are you? You should be getting it right on the first call.
I mean, you know, there's a couple of things, I suppose, not our work, but just referring back to the Southwark Housing Commission, which was the great and the good from housing thinking in the country. And that said, ideal management size for housing units was 2,000 to 4,000, and that the Housing Commission report made the point that large does not deliver so well. And, you know, those of us who've worked in big sprawling bureaucracies will, you know, it's that line of sight thing. And I think, you know, I mean, we get to keep the staff, I think, because our staff do a great job. And the feedback you get from residents from doing a great job, it's a kind of virtuous circle of happiness. So, you know, you do a good job, residents are nice, you think, I enjoy my job, I love doing my job.
And again, back to the repair, would that view be there where, you know, another guy turns up and say, oh, well, I've inherited this job, you know, why didn't he do it, sort of thing? It happens. So with our staff, it's the same staff each time. We never use a different member of staff to go to the actual job he was working on.
I've got lots and lots of members of the committee indicating to come in, so I'm going to be quiet for a while and let them take over. I'll start with Carl.
Yeah, it's not really a question, it's a reflection and repeating what you're saying a little bit. But I do think that because the JMB is small, people know what's going on. People know individuals who work there, and they know residents. I think that's absolutely key. I mean, I go to TRA meetings where people from the JMB come along and they know people by name, and they know their addresses because they live. And the other thing is, I think, so that's great because it's small and people know each other. The other thing I think is really great about it, and which means it works, is the resident involvement as well. It makes the organisation really accountable, I think. For example, if something goes wrong on the Lawson estate, people know where Peter and JP live. I mean, you know that. You know those people, and it's really key. Like, and they'll see them around. So that these guys can't do a bad job because people will be like, it's rubbish. Like, and they never do because it generally isn't rubbish. And I think that also feeds into. JP mentioned the heating, which I think you're talking about the Elam and Meakin, aren't you?
The Meakin estate, yeah.
The Meakin. I found it astounding that the heating went down last year. There was huge problems, quite a lot of anger. There was a meeting, and residents have been told, basically, that system is not going to be up and running and sorted for this winter. If you said to residents on other estates it might not work very well this winter, they would be furious, they'd be up in arms. But this year they know, because they've had a conversation, yeah, it might not be working this winter, but we're on top of it, we know we're repairing it next year, so it's all in order. And I think it just takes away some of the anger, it takes away like the facelessness, and people think, okay, there's a reasonable argument why it might go off this winter, and I know who to contact if it does, and I know that it will get sorted. And I think it's because of the size and the resident accountability, and I think that means that a good job is done, and because of the staff retention.
And actually, I'm going to embarrass the chap next to me, but you know, those relationships, people take an enormous personal pride of what happened. So, very personal example. Following the fireworks that was done by not a JMB managed contract, something horrible happened to the roof of my flat. I live on the top floor. I had all manner of shades of moulds coming on there, and a 6-month-old daughter. And this gentleman next to me took this very personally, and I mean, you're prone to use words like ashamed that wasn't right and wasn't sorted quick enough. And I know that Ron will be on the phone at 3 o'clock on a Sunday morning, Saturday night, Sunday morning, if that's what's needed for a situation. And there is a great kind of blitz spirit, all hands to the pumps when bigger things happen. And all the residents know, people know people by name, and they feel that sense of personal commitment to deliver. So I think that's just kind of. Sorry, it's probably saying the same thing again, but
has that developed over time? So when you started out, was the atmosphere more, should we say, similar to
the expectations were high? Yeah. Because we'd just come from being managed by Southwark Council, so to speak, into tenant managed. So everybody's watching. So let's see. Let's give it 3 months to see how they perform.
I mean, I think what prompted our estate to go into tenant management was the same as what prompted other estates up and down the borough. And there was a lot at the same time, which was the cleaning was no good and the repairs were no good. And so people said, when I go and talk about tenant management to TRAs, they say, well, just ask the question this, could you do better than the council? And you suddenly see smiles kind of come across, TRA chairs, but, because it makes it very real. And we did have estates where windows were falling out, and certainly, I mean, Peter's home and the rest of the homes on his block, they were in a shocking condition for many years, and we don't always get everything right, but I think it's the line of sight, it's the accountability, and knowing you've got somewhere to turn to make things happen, and that's a pressure all the way through the chain, through to the contractors, through to the people that deliver, and that shows in the bottom line, I think.
Carl, you had a follow-up?
Just also to say that I think it also empowers residents, which also increases the involvement as well. Because I for example, Southwark Council and councillors never get housing repairs issues from the Lawson or the Meakin estate, because they're dealing with it and they live there. So I think it empowers them and increases the resident involvement.
So I've got VJ, then Damien, then Ben, then Martin, then Eleanor. Sorry, Chris, I missed you.
You did, yeah.
I'll put you in. I'll put you in at the end of that. And Michael as well. I will get everyone in. VJ.
Thanks for coming, guys. I was just looking at some of the numbers and picking up Councillor Flynn's point on economies of scale on the SOR rates that you provided. I'm really struck by some of the huge unit cost differences you've got here. So, for example, light circuit of 1 controlled by 1 light switch. I think that's just an installation of a light and a switch. There's a unit cost difference of £29.30. That's nearly £30 between what you guys pay and what the council pays, which is frankly pretty astonishing, particularly when you multiply that across the size of the council's portfolio. I'd be really interested to hear whether you can account for that. I mean, as I say, it seems counterintuitive to me that smaller organisation would be getting better value for money. Council should be getting economies of scale. But
you were expecting to be hit. I mean, I was worried when we were tendering out our repairs contractor, our main repairs contractor, for that very reason. And I just was surprised. I mean, I think what we did is we pitched for an organisation in Elkins to whom we're an important customer. So we're not just we're not too big, we're not too small. We're well matched to them. So they wanted the business, and we just tried. We went out and had a go and said, what will you offer us? And this is what came out. We weren't. I mean, it was a competitive tendering process. Other people were bidding as well, but Elkins were the ones. I was as surprised as you. I think it's fair to say that because you always assume there's an economy of scale, and there just wasn't. But that's because I think we pitched to an organisation that we were important to, and we gave a significant amount of work to.
I think it's the same answer as it is in terms of continuity of staff, where if you build a relationship with people and you're not going to get messed around. If I'm not an accountant, but if I were thinking about how I do this kind of thing. You work out, well, what's it cost you, and then you work out what the messing around factor is, and will it get right? Will I be told what to do? Will I be sent to the right place? Will the person be in? And I'm sure all those are factors where you've not got those clearer line of sight that could inflate prices. I mean, as I say, I know because I was having a conversation with somebody recently who was tapping my brain. The cost for replacement of light bulbs, brackets up to 5, is £50. For the call-out job, and as I say, that's something that one of our staff will fit in as and when. And Ron, bless him, was sort of saying, "Oh, I'm enjoying the kind of the change in the hours. I was able to go, past some of our estates and check whether any of the light bulbs were out." And genuinely, Ron said that to me about an hour.
But as I say,
that's the difference between £50 for one light bulb and we'll just slip that in if you've got 10 minutes at the end of the day. I'm sure we'll see even more kind of. I think that's the difference between the in-house team. So there may be a case for having a sort of a retained staff that gives you that flexibility, so you're not always having to worry about the invoices and the contract management and the everything else and all the the sea of paperwork just to get a light bulb changed. Just a thought.
Mm-hmm. Is anyone else's question that they had on the numbers?
And why is it one of the tendering contracts?
Okay, we'll come back to that. Yeah.
Okay. I have a question related. Something related.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, Michael.
There's the issue of economy of scale. I'm wondering, is it a question of economy of scale, or is it just a question of reduced overhead? Because in the Housing Commissioner's report on Southwark housing, one of the things that was pulled out as to why the cost of repairs and all the others are high because of the overhead. Could it be because you have lower overheads than the council, which is why you're able to make such savings?
It might.
Yeah, definitely. I guess.
I think there's still that, the distance, I think, makes it harder to manage. And the distance needn't necessarily be a distance of kind of the number of tiers between the frontline repairs person and the person running the organisation. So I don't know how many tiers there are between the person fixing the light bulb and Jerry Scott. But I know that the chain of command is one of our team, guy who fixes the light bulb, they are men, reports to Ron, who reports to the manager. So that's our comparative.
Yeah. Okay. Damon.
The last time I heard it cost £50 to change a light bulb, I was in a PFI school. It's absolutely true. That's the number they came up with. You've mentioned about the Meakin estate and the problems with the boiler there. I think there was also a pretty major problem with the water supply in Burwash and Simla after the burst pipe. And my question is, how do you manage when these major events, unexpected major events, happen? And I understand that some Section 20 works were postponed because of these major events took priority. Particularly there was a Section 20 notice to Tanner House, and there's also a Section 20 notice issued, and I think both those issued by the council,
for replacement doors, and I already knew from Andy Bates that you'd parked the doors because of the Meakin. How did that all come about? How did that decision making happen, and how did we end up with the situation of Southwark Council putting out Section 20 notices to J&B residents? Don't understand.
Well, a couple of things. But firstly, for those members who aren't familiar, the blocks you were talking about, Sinler and Burwash, are 20-storey tower blocks, very near Guy's Hospital. You can see them probably spitting distance from here. The Section 20 notices go out from Southwark Council at the request of the J&B. Okay. So yeah, that's all under our control. I know we had a plan that we would use money that we'd kind of built up through the self-financing process to replace front doors, and we got what was called a framework contract. So it was one where you could have as many or as few doors as we needed, and the slightly clunky nature of the Section 20 process means that we send a note out to people, even if their door might not be replaced for the next 5 years. But we have to, because we're letting a framework contract which lets us kind of fill in any slack. It's a very coarse way of talking about it. In our capital programme, if we find we've got some not quite money spare, we can then accelerate the pace of replacing the front entry doors. I mean, if I can answer your bigger problem. So we discovered that these tower blocks that were built in 1965, where the pipes went through the concrete floors, nowadays they'd have a kind of protection to stop the concrete corroding the pipe. And these were cast iron pipes, Ron?
Yeah, they're cast iron. No, the barrel galvanised. And when the block was built, it was established that the sleeving passing through the concrete had not been sleeved. So you had a chemical reaction where you had the bottom flat below, you had a perfect piece of galvanised, flat above, perfect. In the middle, there was nothing. It was just passing through the concrete. So how we approached that, as you're going to say about the Section 20, before this Section 20 notice to carry out the works. But what we did, we went back to how you'd see Transco, Thames Water doing the obvious fix it when it starts to leak, and that's how we've managed that up to now. So when we get a burst there, we've got the staff, we've got the knowledge, we address it there and then. And so we're doing it as and when required.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the points we made in our submission to the committee, which is about understanding our blocks. So when we get another, and it's interesting, two identical to look at tower blocks, and the problems have all happened. 3 leaks in one block, and we had 3 leaks of the major 4-inch water pipe within 6 weeks, and we were starting to think, oh goodness, are we going to have to do a complete replacement? And then we looked, and we had, at the same time, a failure of heating to a 123 home estate. So we were then starting to think, oh my goodness, what's happening here? And to say we sat down, we sought advice, we had a lot of discussions. Certainly those of us who are residents kind of were sat around the table with the experts saying, right, okay, how should we play this? Because it looks like it's going to be really expensive. But as I say, I think we prepare people, we've got on top of it, we understand what's happening, and we can justify, in terms of our capital programme, saying, well, perhaps we won't go for full water pipe repairs until a bit later. And then what we're trying to do, we know that the bathrooms of these properties have got asbestos in them, and there's a ventilation system, and I mean, what we don't want to do is cause all the disruption replacing the water pipe, and then all the putting the flats back again, and then suddenly it's all the disruption of the bathroom work. So what we wanted to do was see if we could get away with pushing those two together to minimise disruption for the residents there.
And so far so good? You think you'll...
So far, well, we've not had any more failures since...
No.
In the last 6 months?
No.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. I think I saw you very recently, all of you, at the AGM. I think this report is really interesting. I think Councillor Easton's got a really good point that a lot of it is about size and local knowledge. I think that is going to be a challenge to replicate across the council, because obviously the stock is very large, and I think if we're trying to put forward recommendations, I think it's going to be a challenge to suggest splitting up the repairs service. Like, I think that will be a challenge. That may be what we decide to do, but I think that will be a challenge as a recommendation. But I think there are some other really good recommendations in here, two of which I'd like a bit more detail on. One is the obsessive checking. The other is, you phrased it as measure accurately performance criteria that matter to residents, and particularly I think the time with which you do your repairs, because both of these have costs. Obviously, checking obsessively has a financial cost, and having repairs that take longer but allows you to focus on more planned repairs has a cost in terms of the resident expectation, because every resident wants something fixed quickly. I wonder if you can talk through how you've identified that those costs were worthwhile, and also what kind of resident involvement you had around doing slower repairs but better repairs that allow you to do more planned repairs.
I'm going to add to that as well, specifically the property MOTs, which I'm really interested in.
Just one point on the repairs we do, we safeguard future because the stock is old. We take on board on bath installations, we put in check valves. We do everything to isolate the flat from the main storage tanks. All the services come in are checked, and that safeguards us for future maintenance. Nothing worse than having an installation go in and find you can't turn the water off when you turn up. So that is that safeguard that gives.
Yeah. Because I think, just to add, I was very struck with in here, saying in the public sector no one bothers to check. That's certainly my experience of, in some cases, of council repairs, and I think it's good enough for the council, so it will do. And I think you've managed to.
It's essential.
Yeah.
Because there can't be anything worse if you know you've put forward a repair that it's been undertaken, you've safeguarded someone's dwelling home, the roof, everything, and you've had a bit of a bodge job. You're going to get egg on your face, really, if you don't check it. So we feel that we should check.
So where's the cost? Is the cost in terms of the amount of money and time we spend checking? And as I say, we've got residents who check, we've got people like Peter, those of us who have a role in the tenant and resident system in the J&B who check. We've got our staff that check, and actually doing all that, if that gives you right first time, then that's a saving, not a cost. Sorry,
the other was about the longer repair times.
Again, I think that people are surprisingly reasonable. So, you have a repair which you're entitled to under your tenancy agreements. But, if we say to people, the fact people know that we're there in an emergency, if you say, look, actually, we'd like to do these other things first, and we have ongoing conversations with people at all levels, at the kind of the top level of the J&B and at the Tenants and Residents Association level. I think if you involve people, you take them on the journey, you have conversations with people, then you'd be surprised how reasonable people can be. And so you commented your introduction to your question about what recommendations you might make, and you can't suggest the break up of the council. And interestingly, we. One, I refer you to the Housing Commission that said that the council would be most efficient if managed into 2,000 to 4,000 home lumps, and certainly shortly after the Housing Commission report came out, we went again offering advice to speak to Jerry Scott and the exec member for housing, and so that's that sort of accountability. If you've got a person, at the moment you've got area managers who I could go to my area manager if I lived in a Southwark estate and say, right, what's about this repair? And they say, well, damn all I can do about it. I've got no levers to pull on this. No accountability. If you were to give delegated budgets in certain areas to those housing managers and said, just get it sorted. I mean, it involves unwrapping all the big contracts you've got with all the big boys. But, that in a sense is the world that we're in. And we've got accountability, a delegated budget for the housing manager and the repairs manager. And miraculously, you've got that accountability in line of sight where you can start getting the best out of things. And we certainly found for example, a couple of years ago, we were piggybacking on the council's contract with T Brown, and we were able to get better service out of T Brown and better results and more responsiveness, partly because we made ourselves a pain. And we sat down with them and said, and even though we were, 5% of their contract, it was easier to do things right and not have us on their back than it was to just carry on in the same way everybody else did. And so, that's management, but it delivered dividends, I think.
Yeah, I think what we did there, we formed local meetings with our contractors where we keep the tenant issues, which the day-to-day discontent is kept in a local meeting. Then on the contract meeting, it's just contract issues. So we have an agenda for local concerns why someone didn't turn up to repair one's boiler, and why did this happen? Then we feed that back to the tenant. That keeps us out of contract meetings.
Martin, was that a follow-up?
Yes, it really just go back on the discussion around the checking. I see the figures here, the numbers that were checked, but I'm not appreciating what the outcomes of the checks were. For example, how many visits were repaired on the first? How many repairs on the first visit, for example? How many are therefore being followed up on? Questions such as that, for example, would be quite useful to know if it's available.
I'd like to think that the numbers pretty much spoke for themselves. So that the second column in the numbers talks about good quality. So I think that's right and done to satisfaction. And you're right, we've not captured how many. These could have all have taken 7 goes to have a go at.
Indeed. I'm sure that's not the case.
No. But I think you're right. We haven't presented you with those numbers here. But I hope you could judge from those numbers. I think some jobs will take two or three goes. But again, that's the nature of things. And if the resident themselves is informed by the people doing the repairs that that's how it's going to be, sometimes it does take 2 or 3 goes. Sometimes you have to try something first and say, look, we'll give this a go and see if this works. Particularly the kind of complicated things like random leaks that can just drag on and on. I think it's what I talked about, 3 bits of quality. If you take residents with you, if I tell you it's going to take me 10 goes, 10 visits to sort this out, right at the beginning of the process, you're much more likely to think it's something I could just do in 5 minutes, and at the kind of 8th visit you're saying, not them again.
Okay, I concur. If I may just a further follow-up on that more substantive response, and I'm grateful for that, and go back to what my colleague referred to as to how it's possible to negotiate a contract when you have how many properties in your UMB?
1,500.
1,500 versus tens of thousands in Southwark. It doesn't make any sense how it's possible for you to negotiate a contract that is cheaper per unit. And I'm wondering, maybe you've begun to outline how it might be possible in terms that the numbers of person between your client and the contractor. I can understand that. But what else are you doing? What are the extra ingredients that you might possess that the council clearly does not possess, which means the cost of changing a light bulb is that much cheaper?
Some of this might be actually down to our in-house team, because our in-house team tend to just go and do a lot of the low-level things that cost the most money to do elsewhere. So we employ our own people. They'll go out. We're not sending. We tend to use the contractors for the stuff we can't do. So our first point of contact for every repair is, can our in-house guys do it? And if they do it, fantastic. And I suppose that's so changing light bulbs, yeah, they can do it. They do it, so we don't send it to a contractor, so we're not ripped off.
I think the logical thing on that one myself is, although we're small, people know we haven't got a great deal of money, so they look at keeping everything to the bare minimum. Where with the council, they can go to the council and think, well, look, bottomless pit here, let's charge them whatever we want. And the council, for some unknown reason, just sign the checks. basically, where we scrutinise everything. If a job costs £20, they want to charge us £30, we want to know why.
I'll pause there, Chair. I'll come in my...
we had to come to your question now. So.
Okay, in that case,
please carry on.
I was sorry, did you forget, we neglected to answer the question about MOTs. I don't know if that...
Yeah, please, yes.
Ron, do you want to describe a little bit about the MOT kind of concept and how
we came about that? Well, just in general inspection for repair requests, I was going into some of the properties where people were not familiar with the tenancy agreement. In fact, some hadn't possibly read it. And you're going into places where it was very dated, which was in need of repair, check valves, property doors still with panelled doors, and still not being brought to our attention. So what we did, we looked at our properties in a way, look at the car, see where everything's working and performing exactly how it should. And surprisingly, we started to compile a list of what should be done to these properties, even though no one's brought it to our attention. So we were bringing the tenancy agreement to them, not them bringing it to us. Does that make sense?
And you know, a really good example is I think the stop valves. So, you know, as I did at one stage, you know, turn the tap on, the tap just suddenly started gushing. You know, the fact I know how to turn that off meant that avoided disruption to the people that lived below me, and I was able to wait until the repair happened. Imagine I had no idea where the stop valve was in my property, and I just have to ring up the call centre and the tap's gushing, and, you know, and so, you know, getting those things right and making sure that the stop valves do work and that people know how to use them. And I mean, one of the things that struck us actually is that, you know, sometimes you go into some properties for whatever reason, and you find quite unassuming people who've been putting up with things that they shouldn't have to put up with for far too long.
The most recent one I actually visited was a guy, obviously can't say addresses, I went in there and the whole place was cluttered. It was, if you'd say living in squalor, I'd say it was living in squalor. When we done a rewire there, it was so cluttered that we had to actually find the areas to rerun the light and circuit. He had refused decent homes, kitchen, which was very basic, butler sink, you know, cupboard made on site. It was absolutely appalling. Now, he was living in dirt, he really didn't care about the property. Anyway, we managed to convince him it was best for him. But it was a sad story because he'd got 2 children who refused to visit him. And this actually happened probably about a month ago. Anyway, we got the kitchen done, got it decorated up. And what was amazing to me, he phoned and he complained about the standard of the painting. Well, you know, you got that situation. Just one room, apart from the electrics, was absolutely spot on, and the rest of the place. But it told me he's suddenly become aware of his surroundings, does it not? Don't you find it quite unique? He's now criticising the painting, but look around you. Now, had we not picked that up, it would remain the same. So, again, this is where the MOT is starting to kick in for us as well.
It helps us with some of the broader housing management issues.
The other thing the MOTs do, because we have an in-house team, we have ebbs and flows of work coming in for the in-house team. So actually, when we start thinking, you know, that they have to, they have to meet the value of works that it would have cost had we sent it out to a contractor, and to justify their existence, if you like. So we're a bit mean on monitoring them. But what that does do is if there is some time when they've got it's a bit easier, a bit lighter, or we're not getting quite so many repairs in, we can send people out to do the MOTs that's helpful, that spots lots of other issues that lots of other team, the housing officers can deal with as well. But it also can mean we generate some work when they need the work, which helps them, helps the tenant, and just, it seems like a win for everyone really on that.
Yeah, it is. It gives us programmed work as well for inclement weather, that sort of thing. We also done a decoration scheme as well for our APs for decoration. When they're not painting on our estates in clement weather, they'll arrange an appointment with elderly tenants and decorate one room for them. Going down very well, I must say. It's the initial outlay for that is the cost of the paint and labour. It's not great expense.
Okay. If I may then, Chair. First of all, I just realised sitting here that I do sit on the Browning TMO, so you should really declare, not pecuniary interest of course, but just to make it clear. So of course I'm surprised they're not here tonight, to be honest with you, but never mind. But I'm very conscious of
bits. That was the one. Was that the one that did come back, or the one that said?
No, they did.
They're the one that's So they're the ones that accepted our invitation tonight, but aren't here.
I'm disappointed they're not here, but I'll talk to them another time. But
and we can take evidence from another time actually, because this has been so fascinating. I'd like to get some more in.
And I would recommend Browning would be worth speaking to. They're very efficient and they have some interesting ways of working.
So I'm using Browning as an interesting comparator. What I'm very conscious of, what makes TMOs particularly valuable is tenant involvement. Okay. So it's a very large committee, and we've got nearly 20 odd people on the committee. I don't know how many people on your committee and how well balanced this is, and does it include a broad spectrum of your community, for example? And further on, just to follow up on that, I don't know if, reading your paperwork here, do you have some subcommittees which are specifically with specific responsibilities, for example? And lastly, Chair, I realise that working with Browning, the financial and understanding the finances of a TMO is a quite complex exercise. And I wondered how many of your committee members have gone on training and actually understand the financing and how it works and how to work best for that organisation.
So, I mean, from the top of our structure, so we have a board of 10 resident directors, 2 from each of the 5 TRA areas that make up the JMB. We also have 3 extra directors who are co-opted to bring in special skills. So one of those is an ex-city chap who I know provides an enormous amount of help on the financing front. We do have specific committees. Particularly we have a major works committee that looks in detail at the capital programme and some of the sort of the broader big picture repairs issues, you know, like the ones we were talking about the tower block and the water supply. We have a performance committee that looks at the kind of the day-to-day repairs figures like you've got in the briefing document in front of you. So, and you talked about the demographics. So, you know, our board, if you look at the resident directors, it's been about 60-30, or, you know, 2/3, 1/3 tenants to leaseholders, houses, our estates. As I say, we've got a good geographical spread from the various bits and pieces of our estate. I mean, perhaps we don't represent the ethnic diversity so much. We have fewer people with young families on our estate, but you know, inevitably, as I'm sure you all know, that's the trouble of a meetings-based culture. You know, particularly as I think those two are linked to age and ethnicity. But you know, I mean, that's not saying we're not without diversity. But I mean, that would, you know, if you said to me how should you improve your diversity, those would be the areas I'd point out. And most importantly, it's not just that's the formal committee structure for the JMB, but we have our 5 tenants and residents associations, you know, all of which you have a good number of people who turn out to them. So, you know, we've probably got between 60 and 100 people out of our 1,500 homes who appear at either TA meetings or the other individual meetings and various social events that we have, and that sort of involvement's really important, I think.
We also have sort of feedback groups where, you know, tenants don't want to come along or residents don't want to come along to the meetings all the time. They've agreed that we can phone them up, you know, if we have a particular thing, you know, a new policy change or a new approach to repairs, and we phone up a random selection of those, and we have a lot more diversity there, I think, and we try and encourage people up through the subgroup route if they want to become directors. So A, they understand what what's coming up, and we've had a few unfortunately where people stood as directors and then never showed up. So we're now trying to sort of encourage people to volunteer through the subgroups and sort of cut the teeth and understand what's involved. And we've now got a participation officer who's trying, it's early days yet, but is trying to encourage more diversity with events we run, with trying to attract different people in different ways.
And you explicitly asked about financial understanding, and I think that route up has helped people, learn and acquire the skills. And I think the most important thing is you don't need to know the answer. You need to be willing and armed to ask the question. And actually, I think I'm not the greatest whiz with figures, but you can ask a difficult question and you can see whether somebody responds in a way that's a difficult question. And actually, I think I suppose I should. But Bernie, as finance manager, do you think you get sufficient challenge from the?
100%. I mean, what I within finances, I always present the figures, but we never talk about them in finance subgroup because, frankly, most people are looking at a spreadsheet. I love spreadsheets, but most people don't. Most people aren't geeky like me. So actually, what we've got is a clear set of rules that residents, the directors. Expect me to report on by exception. So if a budget's gone up or down by more than £5,000, I must report it and explain why. And so they're not getting loads of numbers. They're getting, okay, this one's overspending, this one's underspending. Which I think, Peter, I think it's you come along. I know Ruben used to come along to find out some. I think we've got that balance right where it's not really. Actually, the numbers disappear somewhat. So people who aren't fully, financially knowledgeable can play a very, very good role in holding us financially to account. Do you think that's fair, Peter?
Yeah, if we don't understand anything, we just ask. And if we don't understand the answer, we ask him to put it in layman's terms. And he does. And if we need it, at the end of the meeting, if we need any extra, then he's willing to sit down and give it half an hour or so.
And if I can drive you back to my opening comments about repairs and the quality of repairs, it's not about knowing the price of everything and the value of nothing. I encourage you to think about the value. So those three bits that I think make quality repairs, and just trying to squeeze on the finances and kind of very clever contracting, without that monitoring and the stuff that will deliver you quality and without getting the resident experience right. And as I said, we put off repairs that don't need to be done urgently, kept the resident experience up and allowed us to prioritise the work that needs to be prioritised and help, spread the load so you're not always resourced up to be, delivering 100% when, people might actually be twiddling their fingers. So that delivers financial efficiency, I think.
Thank you.
So we've got three more, and that's all we've got time for on this item tonight. And that's Eleanor, then Chris, and then finishing with Ben.
Okay, thanks, Tom. A couple of questions in two areas. The first one is I'm really interested in how you contract, and you talk about you prefer competitive tendering. So I'd be interested in kind of why that is, and sort of particularly how you think you're driving a good bargain with your contracts. So you're going for shorter term contracts, the kind of sort of carrots and sticks you're using with your contractors, that kind of thing. I'd be really interested in finding more out about. And then the second area is on the kind of the big capital projects, big life cycle projects, those kind of things. What's your approach to making decisions on those? Because I can see when I talk to council TRAs in my ward, I think they'd be happy doing the repairs, but I think the thing that makes them nervous is they say, what if the roof needs replacing and we need to sort of be more involved in that, or we need to get, we need to replace a lift, and these are big projects, and so I'd be interested in how you plan for those and sort of financially plan for those.
The second one of those is the easiest for me to answer. So the second one, we became a self-financing TMO, which meant we had the same deal as Southwark Council in terms of we keep the rents and we keep the service charges, but we have to pay for everything from that money. And as part of that, we had to draw up a 30-year asset management strategy that proved that we could pay for all those cyclical replacements of roofs and kitchens and everything else to keep the blocks working over the life cycle. so we employed experts who are much better at spreadsheets than I am to stack up income projections going forward and how much it would cost and match the stock condition survey to the income coming in, and that, you know, before current, excuse me for being slightly political, current government's cuts to what our expectations, we were looking very comfortable within that. Within 10 years we were catching up the backlog and looking very comfortable on our major repairs. We employ a major works manager, and we also employ what's James Bates's title? He's a clerk of works equivalent, like a liaison officer as well. And a bit like Ron in repairs, the major works manager has been there for probably as long as the JMB's been there and knows the stock. And when we did the stock condition survey, it was him that did it, because he, you know, we didn't get a consultant in. He knows the state of the buildings, and, you know, he knows when things were last replaced, because it was him that managed the contract that did that. So we had a very high certainty that our stock condition survey was good. It wasn't a 10% sample and then assumptions. It was 100% done with the knowledge of the guy who'd been running those contracts.
But you know, to pick up your point, I mean, both Peter and I sit on the Major Works Committee, which looks at those big capital decisions, and, you know, since the JMB's existence, it has always been managing the capital programme, so the residents prioritise, and we used to get a kind of a set budget for capital from Southwark, and we'd normally get it 6 months through the year, which made it quite challenging to manage it. But I've never felt intimidated by big numbers. Big numbers are like little numbers, but just bigger. Right? That sounds stupid, but you know, we'll have the same discussions about how do we balance the tower blocks with the failing water pipes, with the estate where the district heating systems failed, with our estate which has got 50 properties that have needed roofs replacing. And some of this is, I mean, you know, Councillor O'Brien talked about what happens to the fire doors, and the answer is, you know, with some advice from great staff, we build in bits of give in the system. So if suddenly we've got a £1.8 million replacement of a district heating system for a 130 home estate, and you suddenly start thinking, bloody hell, you know, well, particularly when you've had to sit amongst the people who are really unhappy and have lived with no heating and no hot, or at least even worse than no heating, not hot water, no reliable, you know, so it goes on and comes off, and that's even worse than it kind of just staying off constantly. And you know, it was reasonably hairy meeting. You know, some of them were, and said Councillor Easton was there, and kind of refereeing for some bits of it. But you know, these are big decisions. But with skill and advice and a good team behind you, you know, again, the people are reasonable, and we appreciate that. You know, with capital things, it's not all. You know, we love the Lawson estate. It's not all Lawson. We can't expect every year, and things have to go around and come around. So we say, fine, you know, we need to put in the water mains replacements and the bathroom work on the tower blocks and the Kipling estate, because that's where it needs to go. And I don't think we've ever had a disagreement or row about prioritising that. And we were always quite good at over prioritising work. So I talked about not getting our budget when Southwark controlled the budget, and not getting our budget through until 6 months in the year. And capital work's challenging because you have to issue all the Section 20 notices for leaseholders. But we were, you know, when Southwark wasn't able to spend all it could, and so, you know, you get the budget 6 months into the year, and then at kind of 10 months into the year, they say, oh, we've got this spare money, could you use it? And we were able to use it. So we had some years when we were able to spend 160% of committed programme. Initial programme, because we were prepared and ready and agile and kind of up for it.
So I think that's it. I think you have flexibility to do that, whereas a large organisation like a council, there's a massive incentive there to kind of just sweat assets and to push them as much as they can when when budgets are tight and you don't have, you know, you've got lots of things to spend on. And I wonder if you've got that flexibility that a big organisation wouldn't have. You can kind of say, no, you know, we're gonna do these roofing works now. We probably could leave it a couple of years, but actually we're going to do it now because that's the most risk averse thing to do. Do you think you've got that kind of?
I think it's I think it's just we were more prepared. So you know, it's not kind of suddenly, you know, another scheme elsewhere in the borough, you know, had been delayed for whatever reason, you know, some technical reason, you know, we just got our one man to prioritise schemes, so we, you know, over-programmed, and it's kind of textbook capital managing a capital programme, and for some reason or another it wasn't happening within Southwark as a whole, but we were managing it, and so, you know, we were able to take up extra slack, you know, if that money was available. So, you know, it's one man. You know, Alan was able to do it, and I don't think it's about maybe it's about mindset rather than scale or size or resource or anything else. And I mean, you asked us about also about the tendering process, and you know, there are. You know, we've recently been through. We have a good relationship with our main backup repairs contractor, who are Elkins, and we've recently been through a process where we re-tendered that, and actually we sought advice and said that, you know, if we went out for a full-scale open tender, that chances are that would drive the prices up, and so we went to the first-tier property tribunal, and we said, look, we can do an extension of this contract through a relationship thing and maintain the prices as they were. So, you know, we were always, and we sat down, because that's not kind of classic open stuff, and we agonised over that, and as I say, we also took it to the first tier tribunal for them to give a proper, you know, official view on that, and we presented the evidence that this will deliver better value for money for our residents, so we should do this, and the first tier property tribunal said we're content with that approach. You know, so again, I think the contracting thing is about if you give people certainty and good relationships and quality there. I mean, Councillor Luther kind of we mentioned on that, and it was the kind of what do you factor into the messing aboutness. You know, and if you've got, you know, and if you need to factor in cushion because the work's always up and down and they're not able to program it, so you've got consistency there, or you know, that you can get sort of sent out on wild goose chases for a variety of reasons, then you will factor that into your pricing. And if you can work with reliable people where you know where you are and you know what you're going to get, then you can drop your prices accordingly, and that's the kind of contract you want, because everybody knows where they are and good stuff's delivered and everybody's happy. That's how it fits together in my head anyway. But is that, are you? Yeah. Sorry, my financial advisor says yes.
Just one more tiny specific question. Do you think that Elkins were able to give you a good deal because they're doing so much work nearby as well on Southwark? I just wonder, you know, if they've got lots of people in the area as well, do you think that might have been a factor?
They did originally, because they were undertaking decent homes projects at the time, but now that more or less finished in their area.
And they're happy that they're keeping the prices. That's good.
And as we say, we'd only send out what we can't manage ourselves.
They were doing decent homes in our area, weren't they?
So
we were able to link the day-to-day and the decent homes.
We still controlled. You know, I mean, we still controlled what goes out.
That brings me to a question I had actually about on page 4, where it says we benefit from the control of being a distinct client from Southwark, but we get similar rates to Southwark because contractors view J&B contracts as a way of spreading their Southwark contract costs a little more thinly. So we were chucking this idea around upstairs, and we came up with the idea that they were in the area was probably what that was driving at. You know, as in if they've got operatives nearby and they're regularly in Southwark, does that keep their costs down? I mean, did you mean something else there?
I mean, I was also trying to see into the eyes, you know, thinking of contracting. I mean, thinking we've had Elkins both be our main backup contractor, and also they've delivered a number of major works programmes. So I mean, they've delivered major works in my home, for example, and they're different teams. So I'm not sure that it was a clear read. I mean, you know, it might be that. You know, as you say, they're operating the borough. I've seen arrangements so where you could look. We talked about, could you split the borough up? You could have a kind of call-up contract where you have 2 or 3 contractors, and then, you know, if you imagine the area housing teams as they were, or, you know, pick a size. Because they're right, okay, we'll pull off and we'll manage that as a, you know, individual little lump contract. There's clever ways you can do contracting to bring more accountability there, and, you know, they'll say, well, you know, we gather we could get, you know, I don't know, what was the numbers? Used to be 17 housing offices at one stage when it was first done, but we could get sort of 6 or 7 of those and we'll cost accordingly because we believe that would happen, and people say we've got this many staff, we're sort of there, but we've had a long-term relationship with Elkin, so I don't think they have the staff they use to do the J&B properties with, and I think even if they weren't doing decent homes work, they'd still say, right, that's our cost base, that's our staff. We have a reasonably steady team, so it's not like they're we're getting new people in. It is similar faces we see.
It's much the same, whether they're in the area or whether they're not.
I mean, I think it might be, if somebody's contracting for a contract with us, they can kind of scale down the Southwark contract and say, well, those are the cost factors. We're in the congestion charging zone, for example. All of our estates are in the congestion charging zone, which is a factor that you would look at with contracts.
Yeah. Two more to go, and then we'll let you go. Chris?
Yeah, I think mine's probably more observation than question.
Okay, yeah.
It's just sheer frustration about what we're hearing. It just all seems so obvious why it's so much better if you're dealing with 1,500 properties. As opposed to 30,000 properties. I was around when your JMB first started. I was worked for the SGTO. Does Di Treasure?
Yeah, she's just stood down this year.
I worked with Di, so we're going back a lot of years. And what was obvious about setting the JMB up was how much energy and work it took to get the tenants involved, to make them feel. We just used to go to meeting after meeting after meeting. The councillors were there, the will was there, and so if a lot of that sort of energy is going into a small area of properties, like the Market Garden, why wouldn't tenants want to get involved? Because it was obvious that at the end of the day there was actually something in it for them. And also a lot of kudos for them because they were actually being included in decision making and actually taught about, they were taught about finance and in not a patronising way, but a level where most people, the major things that tenants need to know were taken into account. So, and the same with the Browning. I was actually a councillor when Browning JMB was set up, and we had Rose there. Exactly the same thing, just so much energy, but it required a lot of commitment from everybody, and that included, their ward councillors who had to put all the energy in, who we very, very rarely see on our estates. It required energy and commitment. It was so obvious to the tenants that because there was that commitment, there was going to be something better for them at the end of it. One of the problems we have now, we fought for the neighbourhoods, 18 neighbourhoods, so that it would be smaller areas to have to cope with when it came to repairs, etc. Where are we now? Is it 8 neighbourhoods we've got now? 6 or 8? I'm not very good at figures. Nunhead and Peckham used to have a partnership board where they met with their contractors on a regular basis. That can't happen now because those contractors now have to go to other meetings where there are many more areas that they have to look at. Tenants now are on the periphery. Our estate officer, who we're really lucky on my estate, we have a really dedicated estate officer who is so frustrated because what can she do with a repair? We take her to see repairs, etc. It's out of her control. We have to go through the call centre, and we have to deal with a lot of people that actually don't give a toss about us, to be honest. And so I could go on for ages about, how obvious it is that this has got to work, and the commitment that it needs from this council to actually get us back to the situation where we feel that we're cared about, that you actually properly consult with tenants. I mean, the last decision was made at the last scrutiny that Director of Housing would be at Tenants Council. No, she wasn't. You know, and consultation is so thin now.
We'll send her a polite reminder, Chris, after
Yeah,
the meeting.
but it's just a case, there's got to be the will.
Did she send a sub though? Did she put apologies or just not show?
I don't know because I'm not. But and that's. I'm sorry, that was a bit naughty of me. That's peripheral to what we're talking about today.
I was going to say, if I can reflect on your reflections, if that doesn't sound horrible, but I mean, I came into the. I'm from Manchester. I came into the J&B halfway through its existence, and you know, and I for my sins had kind of worked in the co-op movement, so I'd had those values of, Manchester's story of the co-op movement is we didn't like the way the shops were being done, so we got together and we did it ourselves. And so, came down and I found myself just by sheer luck, because it was a mutual exchange, in a housing estate that did that kind of thing. So yes, of course, I got involved. And I think, I know the process of setting up a TMO can be really painful, and it was more painful, and they've made it slightly less painful, but it's still painful. But the value of doing things with tenants rather than having been done to or done over, as it too often is just tremendous. And I think the thing that really energises us now, kind of having come in halfway through, is actually the energy of our staff. I mean, you've got a couple of members of staff and a couple of residents. I mean, this is, we manage our own business, thank you. We don't, in a sense, we don't need to be here. But you talk about the energy. It's the energy and enthusiasm and the pride in what we do, and the hope that maybe we can share some of it to improve the lives of our neighbours that brings us here tonight. And as I say, having inspirational and accountable staff is brilliant. I've encountered area managers within Southwark who I thought brilliant people, but are trying to deliver a good service with 1.5 hands tied behind their back, and I'm sure that must be soul sort of sucking after a while.
In general, just asking around people too, do you actually think the call centre's taken away that relationship with your tenants?
Absolutely.
This call centre I see is just another tenant. We get that far, we get through that. Although we have a call centre at night, but when they get problems at night or someone's not happy with the response they get, they can call me and I will speak to the tenant myself directly from home, explain the situation, and surprisingly they were saying, okay, we're coming to the office, we'll pick up next day, with no argument whatsoever. But prior to that, there was with the call centre, hence why they're calling me. They want that personal relationship.
Absolutely.
But with that story, remember, that's not an emergency job sent out at 2 in the morning. And that's money saved, and that's money that we can use to invest in our estate and improve the quality of life for our people. So, there's pound signs attached to what Ron's just told you, as well as a nice story.
Ben?
Thank you. The Chair's very kindly allowed me to ask an extra question on a topic very close to my heart, which is damp. So I think you've summarised wonderfully, I think, the problems of condensation and damp, because it's a huge problem for residents, for housing officers. I wonder if you can just talk. I think the council needs a strategy for damp because it's a huge area of complaints. I wonder if you can talk about briefly what you found about the causes of damp and condensation, particularly around condensation and fuel poverty.
I don't see the fuel poverty being too much of a problem. I can understand in the Masonette people putting the heating on downstairs and vice versa, in the night time change it around. In general, I mean, it's surprisingly when people are using microwaves, they don't know where the steam goes. They think it just all stays in there until you open the door, but it's been emitted. So there's all these appliances in the kitchen areas, doors left open combining with the bathrooms. Still see extractor fans and people opening the windows within the bathroom well, they're actually extracting the whole estate through their bathroom window, being open and out the fan. So there are very basics which we have to explain what's happening. Condensation is damp, but it's created damp. One of the things I've always explained is it's not damp coming in, it's damp trying to get out, which is a simple terms.
Well, I mean, it's, you know, I live in a flat that has structural problems with damp, and it has cold bridging because it's built in a concrete construction, and I've got a 9-inch thick concrete roof on top of me that gets, you know, like works like a storage heater but in reverse. So, you know, I get condensation around the edges of our flats. Interestingly, a solution that was found to the problem I had in my bedroom, which has proved very effective. Sorry, it's a personal anecdote. Was they got like foam wallpaper, it's special insulating wallpaper, and I described the problems I had, and that actually made the world of difference because it evened out. You could, when you get temperature imbalances, so there's something hot and there's something cold, you can get condensation around the edges there, and that's, you know, I don't think it was very expensive to fit, but that has revolutionised part of that. We know we've got buildings with significant structural problems. There's a building called Pebble House, which is the tower block right by the Bricklayers Arms roundabout, that looks all kind of pebble dashy and concretey horrible. Yeah, so, you know, give a copy of the Daily Mail to somebody and ask them to design a tower block, and it'll look like that one. And that's got structural problems, and we're looking to see what we can do about that, because that requires some serious work. I mean, you know, I would say probably overcrowding is more, it strikes me as a bigger issue than fuel poverty. You know, if you've got lots of people in a flat that's not built for as many people there, and you know, it is something. As I say, advice is done. I again said, look, I've got problems. People came round, the teams looked at it and said, oh, actually, you know, you didn't have an extractor fan in your bathroom, and so that was fitted. So we have conversations with people. We know more people living with condensation than come to us and speak out and complain about it. And you know, that's about like the story Ron was saying about repair MOTs. You know, it's an issue we need to get to grips with. But I mean, I've not had this conversation, but you know, I'd be interested to try and see if this insulating wallpaper would make any more difference in some of our other properties, particularly those ones where we know there's a structural problem. Yeah. You heard it here first, but you know, these, you know, yeah. I mean, what's quite good about our structures, we do sit down and we have these sorts of conversations. You know, both kind of one-to-one with members of staff, but also within our committees and structures. And these are the kind of issues that we apply ourselves to, not why the goodness gracious did the person not come to fix this repair when I wanted it done. And you know, that's get the basics right, and you can then start to think about the strategic, which I think is really helpful.
We've got an officer at the moment who's doing a condensation survey, just trying to collate all the information about where it's happening and which blocks it's prevalent in. And we know Pebble House is one of them that it's particularly bad in, but we're trying, you know, we didn't centrally collect anything about condensation before, and we're trying to do that. It's a bit early for us to have plotted out from that. You know, so this is early days for us in terms of the specifics about whether that matches back to fuel poverty, or it matches back to overcrowding, or it matches back to a lack of...
But Matt, I mean, for when we do come back to this, because I think we are going to, I'm certainly going to suggest tonight that we spend a lot more time after this thinking about some of what we've heard tonight and what this might mean for the council. But one of the things I'm very interested in here around the mapping, because actually, you know, it's quite a regular thing. I think when you knock doors in a block and you know you've got 5 or 6 flats all on the same wall that have all been told that it's their way of life that is causing the damp problem, and you think, well, that's quite a lot of people coincidentally with one wet wall, you know, that are all causing their own damp, and actually that would help a lot to be able to look at that data and say, well, actually statistically we've probably got a problem here, rather than some residents dry and washing in the wrong room, you know. So, you know, fascinating to hear you're doing that, and a question for me certainly to put to housing about whether or not we're doing similar.
We actually have an open day regarding condensation come October, November, I think that was last year. was it?
Possibly the year before.
The year before, and what we did there, we took down all the concerns of everyone. And I think Simon's job now is to go back and see whether they've adhered to the advice we gave them. And that's what he's doing now, is compiling that spreadsheet to see how far they've gone with that.
And if it's helped, or
If it's helped, and probably we will find it has helped. And as you're saying, Councillor, is that if it's still ongoing, there's possibly could be another reason for something.
But you're right. You know, if we say we can name a building, and so two of the ward councillors here, where we know there's structural problems, and we've identified that through our audit. And likewise, we know if one person from a block where we've never had any other problems says, I've got that, then you're more likely to have the conversation. And I know the advice about get the conversation Ron and I have had about opening those little vents on top of your double glazing windows, and when you live on the 11th floor on the tower block, you open those vents up and it's bloody cold. Sorry, very quickly.
It's the moisture wants to get out, not eating.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to leave it there for this evening, but you've really brought up quite a lot that I'd like to come back to. So if we had any further questions, which we probably do actually, would you mind us writing to you with some more?
Please do.
And I think a site visit or two might be in order. I'm sure some of the councillors from Grange and Chaucer have probably seen lots of what you do, but I'd love to see more. So if you'd be willing for that as well, and you'd like to accommodate a few of us who might be interested, we'd love to come and see your operation in more detail, because I think that
we're always really pleased to do what we can to support our colleagues in the rest of the borough's council housing. So,
just as a quick one, if we do have any estates that are interested in becoming TMOs, are you happy for us to put them in touch with you? Obviously there won't be lots, so we don't want to give you loads of work. But
absolutely. Myself and Lee Page, because I'm for my sins chair Southwark's TMO committee as well, and Lee and I have gone around a number of estates and spoken to those, some of whom have been quite interested, big and small.
Great. Well, thank you so much for all the work you put into the report and giving up your time this evening. We look forward to hearing more and seeing more and sharing that across the council as we go. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I am minded to, rather than make this a one-off and do some recommendations, I think there's quite a lot of work here. I think that I've been talking to Fitz earlier about the focus of some of the repairs work we've been doing over time. Something we're going to talk about later is the structure and the changes to the council, which I think mean that some of the work we've done before, we should bank that, make a few recommendations, but actually I'd like to see learning from TMOs as being a real focus of the repairs report that we finally put out to Cabinet, because I think this, we started to talk about this a few months ago, and now we've actually had the committee time to listen to TMOs. I've got so many more questions, and I don't think we should miss this opportunity to pick up this learning. So if everyone's okay with that, rather than make any recommendation on what we've heard tonight, I think we start to consider this and start to think about what sort of recommendations we might put in the future. But in terms of, yes, we would need, if everyone was the same size, we'd need 30 JMBs or thereabouts. But that doesn't mean that when, say, one of the repairs contracts comes up for renewal, we couldn't recommend that Southwark perhaps look into doing a couple of small pilots somewhere and see whether this sort of local focus would whether there is any merit long term in looking at whether it would work when it's in-house as well as TMO. So that's something that perhaps we might want to think about. But if we are happy to leave it there and come back to this another day.
We've only got half the story so far.
Yes, exactly.
Can we re-invite some more TMOs?
Yes, I think I'm going to volunteer us all for a late night in November, if that's all right.
If you're interested to chair, completely other side of the scale, Kennington Park House in my ward is the smallest and the oldest TMO in Southwark, so we can invite them.
Sounds interesting. We'll put them on the list.
Yeah.
Chris?
Can I say as well, though, you say it's only half the picture, and when now there's been this much more of a push for TMOs. I've been receiving a few concerns from tenants about what's happening in houses
Yeah,
as well.
good point.
Yeah.
So, you know, we can't see this as just the panacea
Magic,
for everything.
panacea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is why I was suggesting that actually if we did some pilots, they'd be pilots of council officers being responsible in local areas to see whether that would work too.
The housing, sorry, if I may, the Housing Commission did suggest that, I mean, it talked about benefits of TMO, but it also suggested about giving housing managers complete accountability for the services within their patch, and again looking at about 2,000 to 4,000 size, which
and I think that's something we need to go away and look more at as well.
Yeah.
But thank you very much. We're going to have a 5-minute break. We haven't got a massive amount in the second half, hopefully, but we do have a few things to get through, so we have a quick break.